Think we have the waiting room cleared, so I'm going to get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Michelle Lutz. I'm the Director of Support Services at the School District of Springfield Township. I'm very excited to have you here tonight. This is one of our family information sessions. We offer one every single month, and we're very pleased to be joined tonight by Kim Porter from Be Part of the Conversation. Be Part of the Conversation is a local organization, and they've been helping us do presentations for a very long time. They actually predate my time in Springfield, but since I've been here, every year, Kim and I have done several presentations each year to both our families, our community members, and to also some of our faculty. They're actually a well-requested resource, and I know you've done some work with individual parents helping them. But tonight, you are here to have a really great session on Have You Had the Conversation? And so this is targeted towards all of our families out there and how you can broach some of those uncomfortable topics with your children to help guide them to make really good choices. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kim Porter from Be Part of the Conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lutz. It's great to be back with School District of Springfield Township. I appreciate it. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Okay, good. You see it, Michelle? Yep. Okay, great. Perfect. Thank you. All right. So yes, my name is Kim Porter. We're also joined tonight by a terrific young man named Ian, and he's going to be sharing his personal story with you. He is a person in recovery from substance use disorder, and I'm going to let him tell you much more about himself, but he'll be speaking after my portion of the presentation. Just wanted to be with you to talk to you about this really important subject. And yes, I love partnering with this school district. They are amazing. And if you are a parent or an educator in this community, lucky you, because you're in such good hands. From my perspective, it's been really tremendous working with all of them. We have a follow-up page on tonight's topic. Again, I'll share this link in the chat, but this is where you can get you'll find the PowerPoint that I'm going to be sharing with you. You'll also find some resources, a lot of really great resources on that page. And if there's anything that's not on that page that you think would be helpful, you can let me know and I will get it up there. All right, so I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about why I do this work, because this was not my background. I was a graphic designer and marketer in my previous life, and I'm a parent. And this is why I now work in this field that deals a lot with behavioral health, substance use. This is my son and his wife. My son is now 36. Oh my God. And he has 14 years of recovery. So that means that he entered treatment 14 and a half years ago and has been clean and sober ever since, thank goodness, and really grateful for his recovery. His wife there is a therapist, so I really struck gold in the daughter-in-law department. She's amazing. They live in Colorado. They have a great life. But the reason I bring up Daniel, especially for tonight's conversation, is here he is when he was 14 years old with his dad and his sister. Didn't usually wear a bow tie, but he was in the percussion ensemble in middle school. And here we are at Baskin-Robbins after the concert. And the reason this photo is so meaningful to me is the first time that Daniel got high was a year before this picture was taken. So he was 13 years old. That's actually not very unusual for a young person who's interested in experimenting and has some access to substances. He smoked some weed, and the young man who introduced him to it was 12 years old. He was a year younger. So kind of shocking when you see this wholesome family photo. His dad and I knew nothing about it until he was 18 years old. And I used to be very embarrassed about that, and I'm really not anymore, because what I've learned is we parents are often the very last ones to really get it, because we want to believe, not my kid. And believe me, I did not believe this would be my kid. And so what I've learned that I want to share with all of you is you being here as a parent is phenomenal, because your kids are much less likely to have a problem with substances because you're getting informed, you're becoming aware, you're increasing your understanding about all of this. So again, kudos to any parents who are here. So the reason I have this picture of our brain is because the way our brains develop is really important to this conversation. So all of our brains basically develop the same way, basically from the back of our head to the front. So the physical coordination comes first. That is such an important part of, motor skills development, walking, running, becoming, able to find motor skills. All of that starts really early. Emotion, absolutely there very early on. Of course, we have emotions. It's not just about I'm hungry or cold. Now I'm sad, I'm scared, and I'm happy, and all of those beautiful feelings, right? That comes along. Motivation is working beautifully in the teenage years. This is important for development because this is how we learn languages so much more effectively when we're young than when we're more mature, because our brains are highly tuned into learning language, learning skills, learning a musical instrument, a sport, and like I said, languages, things like that. All of that is part of that motivation, that almost like that is the risk-taking piece, because the other side of that coin is I'm going to try things out just because I want to try it out. I'm curious. I want to see what it's like. Did anybody do anything that was really reckless when they were a kid? Of course, because we were highly motivated to check things out, very curious. Those can be good things, but it can also put us at risk. I like to think of that motivation piece as the accelerator part of the brain. That gas pedal's working really well. Guess what's not working so well? The brakes. That's the prefrontal cortex. That's the front of the brain. That is the very last part of our brain to fully develop, which our audiences in person, I usually ask for somebody to shout it out, and almost everybody knows now. It's 25 years old, but roughly around the age of 25, that the executive function piece of our brain is fully developed and able to say, wow, this might be a bad idea. This might affect me negatively down the road. When we're young, we're really not thinking about down the road. We're thinking about, what does it feel like right now? What do I want to do right now? And I like to think of all of this as our brains being kind of like wet cement. When we walk in wet cement, it leaves footprints that stay after it's hardened. But if we walk on dry cement, it doesn't really leave those footprints, right? It's all pretty solidified. So substances like alcohol and other drugs are kind of like those footprints, right, in the adolescent and young adult brain. It leaves can really leave some profound damage if it's so vulnerable, if they're using these kind of substances over and over again. Adults whose brains are fully formed can still have some permanent harm done by substance use, but they're much less apt to develop these problems if they don't start using until they're older. More on that in just a minute. But when we talk about this, I like to caution adults that we don't want to say to a very young person, your brain isn't fully developed. Who wants to hear that? That's very insulting. But instead, to look at it this way, that, wow, you're so lucky. And truly, I believe this with all my heart. A young person is so lucky because this is their opportunity to build great brain chemistry, to make really great connections so that when they're stressed or anxious, they'll learn some of these skills I'm going to tell you about a little bit more about later, that are much more positive ways to adapt to stressful situations and so forth. And I love that expression, what fires together wires together. So all the things that we do, that we learn how to cope with stress, really impact us for a lifetime. And just to drive this point home a little bit more, if we begin using a substance before we're the age of 18, we have a 1 in 4 chance of having problems with substances later in life. Just like my son, starting so young, set him up for having an addiction to those substances. If we wait to try a substance until after we're the age of 21, that risk is reduced to 1 in 25. This is dramatic. This dramatically reduces the risk for substance use. And even so, what is it about substances that some people become addicted to them and others don't? Well, they're basically kind of 3 legs to this question. One is genetics. Genetics accounts for about 40 to 60% of the risk for developing an addiction. So pretty significant. So looking at the family tree, not only alcoholism or drug addiction, but it could be gambling, it could be other kinds of process addictions and things, but genetics plays a really big part. Psychosocial emotional piece. So what is there any mental health challenge, whether it's been diagnosed or not? It could be depression, anxiety, ADHD, personality disorders, things like that. Trauma is certainly another very big risk factor. Environment is a huge piece of this as well. So what is the access to substances in the home, in the community, in the friend group? And again, all of this is exacerbated by the age of the onset of use. Okay, so looking at some trends, this comes from some national studies that were done looking at the percentages of young people who have used alcohol, for example. I'm just breaking this down between, we could show you so many slides about substance use and teens and young adults, but we're going to just focus on two things, alcohol and cannabis for now, because they are the most used by young people right now, most used substances. So eighth graders, about 23% have tried alcohol at some time, and about 61% of 12th graders have tried alcohol at some time. This does not mean they're using it problematically. Frankly, I think it's fair to say like any use under the age of 21 or even 25 could be problematic. But this is tried it. Where they got it, we don't know. Could be from offered to them by the parents. It could be from a friend. It could be they snuck it somehow themselves. But this is roughly where the initiation begins. If you look at cannabis use, not quite as high. So eighth graders, about 11% have tried cannabis, and about 38, almost 39% of 12th graders have tried cannabis. And if you look at alcohol use, and I've broken this graph down. This is just over the lifespan, basically. So we're looking at this first gray, darker gray area is under 18, and then this lighter gray is 18 to 21. And of course, in this country, the drinking age is 21. So you can see that by the time they're legally permitted to use alcohol, or any of us is legally permitted to use alcohol, it's escalated. Obviously, it picks up. We start trying it. There are those numbers that you saw. This is lifetime on the top here, annual, past 30-day, and then daily use. And so, not too surprising, I guess, but it's just really, I think, worth seeing that it does tend to level out. The use tends to level out. The initiation of use tends to level out once we're adults, fully developed adults, but really a lot of use is picking up in those early, very vulnerable years. And then also, if you're looking at alcohol use under the age of 21, look at the correlation to having an alcohol use disorder, alcohol-related problems, mental health problems that are associated with the alcohol use, adding illicit drug use to this. So that's cannabis, that's pills, that's things that are pills that are not prescribed, things like that. And then also looking at suicidality and hospitalization. So this is the impact of those early years. And the later you start, even when we look at under 21, but here's kind of that high school conclusion right around here, around the age of 18, you can see that even then it really does increase the risk of a lot of those problems. And this is just looking at early alcohol use. This is not getting into anybody who's misusing ADHD medications or using cannabis or other things. This is just looking at alcohol. The decision that a young person makes about using alcohol or not using alcohol has so much to do with parents. So this is a meta-analysis of a number of different studies that asked young people who influenced their decision, whether they're going to drink or not drink. Television ads and things like that, friends, pretty significant, siblings, teachers, media. It's parents. It is across the board, all these different studies, it is parents. So whether it's this does not mean that all of these parents were offering their children alcohol and it made that kind of an impact. It could be that the parents made it really clear that they're not supporting them drinking alcohol, or that they're, making that choice to not use it at all, to not try it. But it is hard to believe sometimes as parents that we're influencing our kids. We absolutely are. And it's often through our behaviors and what we're modeling and the choices that we make, even more than what we tell them. We've got to show them what we believe. And one of the ways that, I talk to so many parents about this who really want to believe, and I'll confess to you that I may have believed this to some extent before I worked in this field, before I understood that my child was struggling with substance use. I probably was one of those parents who thought, like, it's probably better that they're at home and they try it when they're not going to be out there at risk if driving or hurting themselves. But the reality of this is that we know giving permission, even under all kinds of conditions, I take your keys, you only have this much, you only do it here. That's just giving our kids the message that we are okay with them consuming alcohol. It's also giving them the message that we think it's really important to have alcohol, to have a good time, or to socialize. But unfortunately, when we do this, the permissiveness kind of leads to a lot more substance or alcohol use. It leads into car crashes, other risky behaviors. And this permissiveness has more of an impact than peer pressure, as you can see here. So really important that we make this message really loud and clear to our kids. We're not okay with them. There's a reason the legal age is 21. And by the way, I often hear people bring up Europe, that, oh, but in Europe, it's, kids can drink younger, so they don't have this forbidden fruit kind of mentality. Well, that is true that it is easier to get alcohol when you're younger. There's also a whole lot more alcohol use disorder in European countries, much more so than the United States even. And so this is not a good argument for why it's a good idea to introduce kids at a young age to alcohol. And again, here's this message, right? I've had a rough day. I'm going to pour myself a glass of wine, beer, have a drink, whatever. When the friends come over, the adult friends come over, do our kids see us offer them a drink the second they walk in the door? It just kind of reinforces that importance in and we get lots of help with this messaging, by the way, through, try watching a football game with your kids, right? Every commercial or almost every commercial has some kind of substance use, or now sports betting and gambling and gaming and everything else, all these kinds of maladaptive ways to escape life, right? So we want to, again, model this. And we're by no means are we prohibitionists here. We're just wanting to make sure that we're thinking about our messaging around our young kids. And the protective factors around our young people are really important. So knowing that they can talk freely about their feelings, more on this in a moment, that we are there for them, that we're consistent as adults in their life, that they have some of that consistency, they have some of those guardrails, they have other adults perhaps in their life that they can turn to if they're concerned about something or struggling and don't necessarily feel comfortable talking to mom and dad. But they really are so vulnerable. We want to kind of be the community that builds the scaffolding around our child. And this is our chore as adults, right? This is why we're all here. And these are all the people that are in their lives that really can make a difference and hopefully prepare them to not need any of us anymore and go off into the world and learn how to moderate their use of technology and all sorts of things without struggling to rein that in if they start to have problems. So when we prepare for this topic, we often ask for some feedback from our communities. And we've collected a number of these responses over the years. And what we do is we ask fifth grade teachers, usually it's through a health class or something, to hand out index cards to their students and instruct the kids to not put their name on it at all. This is going to be anonymous, but write down any question you have about drugs or alcohol. Well, we've collected hundreds of these responses over the years, and there are so many themes, and I could sit here all night and share them with you, but I'm going to share several that are the most commonly asked. And I just want you to remember when you see these are fifth graders local to this area. Most of them were in Montgomery County, frankly. So these are our kids. Here is one that we might hear a lot. What are the main reasons that people do alcohol or drugs? So I'm going to give you some ways that we might respond to some of these questions. So here's a response maybe. I'll tell you what I've learned, then I'd like to know what you think. People sometimes use alcohol or other drugs to change the way they're feeling. Unless a doctor prescribes medicine that's best for that person, drugs and alcohol aren't a healthy way to feel better. What are some ideas you have about what we can do to feel better without drugs or alcohol? And you also might want to think about asking a young person, why do you think people use drugs or alcohol? They've asked the question, but it'd be interesting to see what they think. There are also really great opportunities for this when we're watching television or a movie and you see somebody pouring a drink or they're drunk or something like that in the story. Maybe to hit pause and have a little conversation about it. Like, what's that about? You think they have a problem with that? What would that look like? And here's another question. Why do you have to be at least 21 to drink alcohol? Well, I think I've hopefully made this point with all of you. But what we can say to a young person is there are a lot of things we're not allowed to do until we're older, like driving and living on our own. And that's because our brains are still growing and changing until we're adults. We want our brain to be healthy and able to make good decisions. And let's face it, alcohol is not good for our brains at any age, frankly. So I've got all kinds of important information I could share with you about that if you'd like to know more. If you follow Andrew Huberman, one of my favorite podcasts, the Huberman Lab, he has like a 3-hour program on alcohol. And the bad news for anybody who really likes alcohol, it is not great for our brains. And so this is certainly, this is just my side notes. We're not going to get into the Huberman Lab with our little kids. But yes, we want to make sure our brains are nice and healthy. Another question, are medicines, this comes up so much. People want to know, kids want to know, they hear that word drugs, and it's confusing because heroin is a drug. Advil is a drug, right? Oxamoxicillin is, antibiotics are drugs, right? Can you get addicted to doctor's medicine? And along kind of that same line, here's another one. Some kids drink cough medicine to get high, which is absolutely true. Is that bad? This is a fifth grader asked this question. So along both of these lines, what we can talk with our kids about is that when we're using medicine in the house, we have these opportunities to educate. So here's your Augmentin, amoxicillin, whatever it is. Now, you and I know you can't get addicted to an antibiotic, but it's a teachable moment. Any kind of medicine, even if it's an over-the-counter like Delsum or Robitussin, those can be problematic because they have dextromethorphan in them and they can really cause some problems if kids are drinking too much of it, because sometimes they do that. But here's that opportunity to say you only take as much as is prescribed or as directed on the bottle, or as much as mom and dad are going to give you. And you only take it as long as you're supposed to. You don't keep taking it. So just having that moment to really eye to eye, we're going to sit down, kind of turn off the distractions and have this serious conversation so that they get it, and have them repeat it back to you and talk about this and ask any questions about that. Because a lot of times, there's even a lot of folks in the adult population who think, well, this sure helped me with my back surgery after my back surgery. So now that I'm having some shoulder pain, maybe I'll take that pill that's still in the medicine cabinet. And that's really not how that's supposed to work. So this is a great opportunity to have that conversation with our kids. Also, just want to make this point every time we talk about medications in the home. If you have prescribed or any other kind of medications that could be alluring to a young person to try, please lock them up, put them someplace safe and out of sight. This could be their friends coming over and curious and looking around. You just don't want to have young people have access to meds like this. If they're no longer needed, if you have those post-operative painkillers in the house and you just don't need them any longer, please take them to the police stations in our region. All have these drop boxes so that they can be disposed of they should not be flushed. That's not good for the water system. They should not go even into the trash, because that ends up in landfills and things and gets back into the water system. So there are all these great ways to properly dispose of anything that's expired or no longer needed. Is there a cure for alcohol? This is again a fifth grader's question. I have a family member who drinks alcohol but can't stop. Boy, we get a lot of these questions too. I remember a fifth grader saying, my pop-up gets so mean when he drinks beer, things like that. We hear a lot. Our kids see so much more than we wish they did. We wish they were so innocent and pure and didn't see this stuff, but they see it and they get it and they're concerned. So when this kind of stuff comes up, they notice it. We want to acknowledge that they're noticing it. So instead of if they might say to us, like, I'm worried about grandpa. My reaction as a parent might be to say, don't worry, don't worry. Well, they're worried. They just told us they're worried. So instead of saying, don't have that feeling, let's talk about that feeling. And we want to really use language when we're talking about somebody who's drinking a lot or using drugs or having problems of any kind with substances, to use non-judgmental language. This is so important because if we want our kids to talk with us about their questions, their curiosity, the choices maybe they've already made, maybe they tried their friend's big brother's vape pen. We want them to know that we're not going to freak out when they tell us this, that we're not going to judge them or the friend that offered it. I always tell the story of like the child comes home from school, they take off their coat, and you get this whiff of some smell that you've never smelled before. And they confess to you that, oh, I tried a vape pen. Who'd you give it to? Who gave that to you? Where did you get, like that's where we go, right? We go to the who, what, where, when, and not the why. So let's worry less about getting the friend in trouble for giving them a vape pen and more about like, why did you want to try that? We can have this conversation around those public figures who might have a fall from grace. We don't want to disparage them in our language because, again, or that kid down the street that the police car just came for the third time this month, or that nephew or niece that is, having a lot of problems. We don't want to use language that demonizes them or sounds judgmental because we want them to talk to us about this stuff. As far as a cure goes for this young person's question, is there a cure for alcohol? There is treatment for alcohol use disorder, substance use disorder, but it is a lifelong process. It's certainly not a cure, it's a treatment. There are so many ways that substance use can be treated. Okay, here's another one. I think this is about the last one. My friends use drugs and they always tell me to try with them. I'm afraid, but want them to be my friends. Oh, this hurts my heart. Ask our child, this is about role playing. So like there are some ways that our kids can say, and we're not going to say just say no. We know that's not effective, but they can at least act out how they want to refuse it. Like these are refusal skills. Like I don't want to try that. Or so they could say like my mom would be so mad at me, or my dad would be really mad, or I want to be on the soccer team, so I really can't do that. I also love this suggestion came from a young person who said, why do you care? Like if they were getting pressured and, come on, why are you not drinking? Everybody else is drinking. Just turn it around on them and say, why do you care so much if I drink? That kind of shuts it down pretty effectively. So it can at least that role playing is like experiential learning. It's preparing them for when they're actually in that situation. And if they don't feel comfortable role playing with us, they can find a really trusted friend that they can talk to about this. Also using like a code word so that, our special word, I remember one guy told us that peanut butter was his word. So he would text his mom and say, are we out of peanut butter or something like that? And that was her cue to like come and get him, so he was uncomfortable in a situation. So there are all kinds of ways that we can make a plan with our kids so that they feel safe in those situations, and encourage those refusal skills. So now let's say our young person made a choice that we're not excited about. This is probably very much what I look like when I finally discovered what was going on with my son's drug use. I freaked out and I started lecturing. And the very first time I knew he was high, he was under the influence, he was high, and I started my lecture. How effective was that? I wish that I knew then this acronym WAIT, one of our favorites. It stands for, why am I talking? I was not at all effective in that conversation. I wish I had taken a breath and said, okay, go to bed. I'm going to talk to dad. We're going to have a conversation tomorrow sometime. But right now, I just want you to go to bed and we'll talk tomorrow. And take some time for ourselves to think about this, to talk with the other parent, get on the same page, decide how we want to handle it, be prepared to be consistent with our messaging and any consequences. Maybe we haven't made it clear that we're not okay with substance use, but to have a unified effort with the other parent and to do it calmly and rationally. if our young person, like that scenario I just told you about where a kid comes home, takes off the coat, smells a little funky, if they say, Brian down the street, let me try his vape pen. Wow, thank you for telling me the truth. I'm really glad you told me the truth. I'm not glad that you used the vape pen, but we're going to talk about that. But you can always tell me the truth. So we want to start with that. And because really what we do so much is that this face, right? What? You did what? No, we're going to be calm because we want them to keep talking. We want to encourage that honest, open dialogue. So, what made you want to try that? Why were you curious? What questions do you have about it? I want to make sure that I'm clear about where your parents feel, what we feel about this. We also have opportunities when, like, we all just had, probably a lot of us were at Thanksgiving with a lot of family members, some of us more than others. And, we see sometimes some behaviors that, again, our kids are picking up on this stuff. So let's say there's a family member, I'm just going to say Aunt Lisa, who had a lot to drink and knocked over a lamp maybe or something like that. And maybe when we get home that night, we can talk to our child and say, did you notice anything different about Aunt Lisa tonight? And just to see what they have to say. And again, we're not going to disparage Aunt Lisa. We're going to say, man, I sure hope, she gets some help, and I'm worried too, or something like that. We can talk about this, and also to say, this is our family. And if family members of ours, thinking back to those genetics, family members of ours use substances, we're pretty much, going to be very cautious about our own substance use because, using problematically. Because somebody had asked this question in advance that I really appreciated, how to talk to a young person about a family member who has a substance use problem. And almost every kid understands peanut allergies or nut allergies because they have to be careful about the snacks they bring to school. Everybody gets the caution about nut allergies, right? So we can say, like, well, you know how some people are allergic to nuts? Well, there are also some people who have that kind of reaction when they try alcohol. Some people don't like it. That's one reaction. Another reaction is they like it a lot. They like it so much, they're going to have too much of it and keep using it. And they just have more and more, and they want more and more. And they just have that reaction. And if this is something that is genetic, that is in the family, we can say, a lot of people in our family have this reaction. So we need to be aware of that. So that's just one way for a very young person that we can have that conversation. And again, let them do some of the talking. Let's just listen and see what they have to say and not freak out with their question, but just kind of have a thoughtful response to it. Or to say, you know what, let me think about that and I'll get back to you about it. I really appreciated something that was told to me by a school guidance counselor years ago. She was talking about emotional vocabulary, and she said, our kids need help with their emotional vocabulary, like what kinds of feelings they're having. Because in the absence of good emotional vocabulary, we'll use our behavioral vocabulary. So that's like acting out, that's sitting in front of a gaming device for hours and hours. It's, just different ways that we're manifesting our feelings without being able to express them. So I mentioned earlier that we have that follow-up page, and on that follow-up page, is this handout that you're welcome to print out, put on your fridge. It's just a nice way to build some of those vocabulary words. And you see, I have a blank space down here, so your word may not be on here, but this is a great way to just sort of even to pick something out, and we can play along and say, wow, I'm feeling really embarrassed today. And like, what does that look like, right? What did it feel like to be embarrassed? Or ask them, what does it feel like to be grateful? Or can you think of a time that you were discouraged? So there are so many ways to make this part, like to normalize these conversations about feelings so that our kids have an outlet for expressing their feelings. So when we see our kids struggle, as I did with my son, we want to take away their pain. I could not stand seeing my son in pain. And so if he didn't start his paper and he was really depressed that week and really, just not in a good place, I might want to help him with that and make it easier. And what I'm doing is robbing him of an opportunity to get some growth and to learn that there are going to be consequences if he didn't start the paper on time. Whether or not he's depressed or struggling or having a hard time, that is going to be a part of his life. And I am not always going to be there to make all this stuff go away. This does not mean that we don't need to be empathetic and sympathetic and supportive in other ways, but appropriately supportive. And we're also giving the message that you can't handle this. You can't handle your depression. You can't handle your frustration. You're getting in trouble at school. So you need me to make things better. This is not the message that we want to give our kids. There's a pediatrician out of University of Pennsylvania named Ken Ginsburg, who's the expert on early childhood resiliency. And he has books about fostering resiliency that are phenomenal. And I love this quote from him. I like to think of myself as a lighthouse parent, reliably there, totally trustworthy, making sure he doesn't crash against the rocks, but committed to letting him learn to ride the waves. So we're not jumping into the choppy water with them. We're going to be that lighthouse that's really solid and stable and guiding them to make good choices. Here are just a few kind of prevention things that I wanted to share with you. Turn off the cell phones, put them away so you don't even hear them vibrating. And when you're at the family dinner table, right? And I think you all know this by now, that there's so much research that says that time together like this, trying at least a couple times a week to have a calm, quiet, as quiet as possible, dinner with one another. It has all kinds of really great benefits. I mentioned earlier about those opportunities to create great pathways in the brain, and one of them is learning about mindfulness. There's so much research behind this as well that says that when we learn how to self-regulate, how to calm down, how to use our breath, know where our feet are, all those kinds of things can really help with focus and clarity, and again, just building really great pathways to dealing with stress and anxiety. And getting outside. Oh my God, there's again so much research. There's a book by Richard Louv called Last Child in the Woods that talks a lot about this, how much it impacts rates of depression and anxiety. It increases focus. Kids are less stressed and aggressive. It's just phenomenal to get some time outside. And it's also great, by the way, to model this by saying, you know what? I've been on my laptop, all day long. I've been looking at screens. I've had a kind of stressful day. I'm going to go take a walk. Do you want to come with me? Wow, there you go. Instead of saying, I'm going to go grab a beer, I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to get outside. Let's go play with the dog. Let's go rake some leaves. Let's, be outside. It's a great, great way to model that kind of decision to cope with stress. I just want to point out that if you're a part of this school district, it's a public school. They have student assistance program. They have all kinds of resources, and Dr. Lutz can tell you much more about this. But not a lot of parents know about SAP, about student assistance programs. So I just wanted to throw that out there. That is everything that I've got. I talked a really long time, but now I'm really excited to introduce Ian to you, and I hope that was helpful. But we'll talk more on the other side of Ian's share. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you, Kim. Again, thanks for letting me do this. Really grateful to be here tonight. So I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of my recovery story, kind of give you a rundown on what it was like for me, and mostly like where it started. So starting out, talk about how I was as a kid. I've always been more like curious, moving super fast all the time, just like there's almost no stop button, right? And that'll explain more as I get more into my story on how that played in my life and in my journey to recovery, right? But when I was growing up, I was always had some sort of smile on my face or wanted to talk about something. And I had two parents who, were very good to me and wanted to raise me the best way they could, right? And so, as a kid, um, I was not very. You could talk about school. When I was in school, there wasn't much schoolwork getting done. It was the thing I liked the least, and I feel like that kind of shows, right? That I wanted to do what I wanted to do, and I had my own way of doing things, and I just um, really like had a hard time focusing. And I think by the age of 5 years old, I was put on medication for ADHD and depression. And even though I say I was a happy kid, because I was, um, I also, get really sad about things. And I had a hard time sometimes making friends because I felt like I was too much, right? Um, and really, there was something deeper down inside of me. I kind of had that feeling of being lost all the time. And I didn't really know um, what I was doing with myself. So, growing up, and good parents, like I said, wasn't a fan of school. The first time I ever had a drink or a drug, I was 11 years old. Um, and that plays into what Kim was talking about, right? I had these friends, and I didn't necessarily want to do it at the time, but I was curious. I knew my parents drank alcohol, and I decided I wanted to give it a try. Um, and from that moment on, the second I had that sip of alcohol, I was immediately in love with it. Um, it made me feel um, like it made me have feeling because for a while, like I was looking for something to get this numb feeling out of the way, and that made me feel confident and important and wanted, right? And it made me seem like my friends would like me too. And that was really the main reason I was doing it. But there was also, some curiosity to it. And when I got into that whole thing of trying, because the first thing I ever tried was alcohol, right? Um, and so when I was done with that, I was always continuously chasing that feeling, right? Um, as a lot of people who are in recovery or in active addiction, right? We're always chasing one certain feeling, and it's never the same after that. Um, so from my experience with it, right? Um, I was doing whatever I could from that point on to get that feeling back. Um, but I was also hiding it, hiding my feelings, not talking about it, shutting down. Um, not I didn't feel like I was able to express the way I really feel. Um, and there was a lot of I pushed it down, right? But there was a lot of pain, and I was suffering realistically because I was trying to cover up, this horrible feeling I had, and I didn't know what that feeling was at the time. Um, and then again, we're talking about at this time, I'm still a kid, um, but I still have these feelings of anger, and I'm sad all the time. So continuing on, right? as I get older. You know, I'm always chasing that feeling. It's not like I can always get it, but you know, I'm able to find other ways to, you know, get that feeling, right? And Kim talked about it in her presentation. Like there was, you know, in the medicine cabinet, like my dad had a bunch of surgeries, so there were painkillers in there, and I think the first time I ever went for those, I was around 13 years old, and from then on, I really did whatever I could, but you know, that ended up being my drug of choice, right? Is those painkillers. And as it progressed, I mean, day by day it gets worse, right? And we don't know what we're doing because, you know, we talked about the brain chemistry, right? Our brains don't, you know, aren't making like the right decisions for us at the time because they're not developed. And I have to remember, right, that when I think about it today, that when I'm feeling bad about it and I wish it didn't happen, I didn't know what I was doing at the time. But I knew I was covering something up. So as my time went on, I feel like, and at this point, I've already been to a few treatments and I've gone to IOP, right? And I've done that whole thing and nothing has seemed to work for me yet. And eventually, right, for what had to change for me and a turning point that happened, even though when this happened, I didn't stay sober after, it made me realize I had a problem with drugs and alcohol. I had to lose some people in my life. Um, and that showed me, like, oh, like maybe this is a problem, right? Maybe a problem's happening. And my parents always ask me, right, like, what could I have done to, you know, help you out more? And realistically, they did the best they could. Um, my dad works in healthcare industry, so he understands. My mom, she's a teacher, um, so she sees it all the time. But what they could have done is better, in my opinion. And sometimes parents in general have a hard time doing this, is holding that boundary with their kid, right? Saying, I'm not going to put up with this. Because even though my parents did exactly what they were supposed to do, they were sometimes, you know, I wouldn't say it was babying me, but I needed some tough love in my life, and that's not what I was getting from them. But sometimes, as you know, as a kid, it's, you know, they weren't ever like yelling at me like, you can't do this, you can't do that. You know what I mean? They were always like, you know, well, I'm glad you told me this. We don't want you to do it again. What can we do to help? And they did the best they could, right? It was all depending on if I wanted to change. And eventually I did, you know, even if it took a little bit. But, you know, they did do a lot of things right. It's just I needed to realize and see that what I was doing was wrong. And unfortunately, I had to lose some things for that to happen. But what I like to say when, you know, and I did this last year, and I had a few good questions. What I like to tell people is I didn't want to hear what other people had to say, and sometimes, you know, as I know me personally, but like your kid doesn't want to hear it, right? They want what they want when they want it, and that's how I was. So I'll talk a little bit about the time I got sober and what it led up to. I had just got out of a sober living. For those of you who don't know what sober living is, it's usually an aftercare out you get out of treatment, right? And I was living there for a little bit, and I got out. I had about 9 months sober, and when I got home, I immediately, because when I was there, I didn't take anything seriously. I immediately went back to what I was doing, and eventually, I had some people in my life, and my parents sat me down and they told me, "Hey, we can't do this with you anymore, and you need to figure something out because you can't live here, but we'll get you the help you need." And that's almost eye-opening, right? To be like, I've done so much damage in my life and to these people around me, and they don't want to be here with me anymore. And I needed to hear that from them, to make me realize how bad it actually was. And I'm eternally grateful for it today too, because it made me who I am today. So I accepted the help, and when that happened, I knew I wanted to be sober, and I knew something had to change. And I just did everything that people told me to do. I went to meetings, right? I I went to a sober house, a different one. I stayed there for 9 months. I worked a program following principles that and working steps, and I, you know, found a community around me of people who were just like me and people who I could lean and depend on, right? And after I, had some time under my belt, and kept doing the right thing, my life got a lot easier. And I felt like I didn't need a drink or a drug to make me feel normal. And I can tell you, I remember the first day I woke up. I was around 6 months sober, and I didn't think about a drink or a drug. And on that day, I remember feeling so much peace and serenity that I knew something had changed. And my life is a total, has done a total 360. I work at a treatment center today, and I try to help out people like someone did for me. And it's really like what I want to continue doing. It really is what puts a smile on my face. And that's all because I was able to take direction, right? But yeah, I appreciate you all listening. And Kim, thank you for letting me share. And I think that's all I got.
Wow, Ian, thank you. That was amazing. I want to ask you a quick question, and I really would like to invite Dr. Lutz to do as well, and share any thoughts you're having too, Dr. Lutz. You said that you finally did everything people told you to do. How old were you when that was happening?
I was 18 eventually when I was taking direction. Yeah.
That's impressive. I think it's got to be very hard for an 18-year-old to say those words, "I surrender," right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what got you there that you were able to say, "Tell me what to do"?
I think I was at a point where I had lost so much, and I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I was ready to just kind of give it up and be like, I see people with this good life. That's what I want. And people were telling me all I have to do is listen. And that's exactly what I tried to do. And it's funny how it works out. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Dr. Lutz, what would you like to add to this conversation? I really hope you folks will start asking us some questions. Put things in the chat. use the raised hand thing, whatever, but go ahead, Dr. Letts.
Sure. Thanks, Kim. I just want to touch, you did such an amazing job talking about, how parents influence their children. And I think that comes through every other year. Our students at our middle school and high school participate in the PAYS survey, which is the Pennsylvania Annual Youth Survey. And it asks them questions related to drug and alcohol use, along with, social media, all the hot topics du jour. And one of the things that we notice in our survey is just how much, like you showed us, that parents influence the decision. They're generally the people that provide the alcohol. They're typically the people that are saying to their children, "Oh, just drink here. Have your friends come here. We'll keep your car keys. Don't drink and drive." And you were here for another presentation, I believe last year in person, where we kind of flipped that narrative with parents, and we talked about that we don't have to give permission by saying things like, "Oh, just call me for a ride." And he touched upon it a little bit, but I want to hit it home for the parents who are in the audience tonight. Something better to say to your child is, if people are doing these things, here's the code word, right? So that you can contact me and I will come and get you. As a parent, throw me under the bus. I say that to my own children all the time. I can be the bad guy. I can take it. Your friends don't have to like me, right? You can always say, "Oh, my mom would kill me," or "My mom will make sure that Christmas doesn't happen this year," or "I won't be able to drive to school anymore," or "They'll take my money," or whatever it is. Like, I'm comfortable being that bad guy. Send me your code word, whether it's "Do we have peanut butter?" or like my kids and I have an emoji, and all they have to do is they click in the emoji, and then I know, and then I'll call and be like, "I need you home. Your room's not clean," whatever it is, to help them get out of that situation. But flipping that narrative, which I think is something that you talked about, but strategies around that you can talk with your child about.
Yeah, and you're reminding me too of a conversation I had with my son well into his recovery. I said, because we were building these programs and talking with parents, and I said, I keep hearing this recommendation, not from educators, but from like on websites and things that say have an agreement that you'll pick them up if they've been drinking with no questions asked, because I was like, and I always, there's something about that bothered me. And so I asked my son about it, and he was like, "Let's think about this, Mom." So I'm underage. I'm at a party. I've made the decision to drink. I'm drinking. Now I'm drunk. This is when I'm going to make the right decision and call my parents and say, "Come and get me. Don't ask me any questions, but come and get me." And I don't want you to see me drunk. There's no way I'm going to call you. That's different than I'm at a party and there's a lot of drinking. Get me out of here. That's a whole different story. But the thing that I was reading about, no questions asked if you've been drinking, why would I not ask questions about the fact that you're 15 and you've been drinking, So I really appreciated that, yeah, our kids as a child, when I was maybe underage drinking, just maybe, that I didn't want my parents to see me like that. I was not going to call them for a ride. I was going to do an even dumber thing probably, because now I'm drunk and 15, so yeah. I don't know. Ian, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah. That's, that's something my dad would tell me, right? It was touched on a little bit. He said, "Hey, you can make me the bad guy. I can be the bad guy," right? And that's fine with me. But also, I remember there was one time, and I made up a total lie to my dad. I was like, I only had 2 drinks, right? And I knew I was drunk, and I came home, and I knew I was drunk. But I was like, I only had 2 drinks, and it continued that way to where it was eventually got to the point where I was like, I am no longer able to find my way home and I need a ride. And he handled it very well, to the point where he was he waited till the morning to give me that lecture, right? But in the moment, he knew I wouldn't be able to comprehend anything. So he handled it the best way he could and the way he knew how to do it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Hmm.
So here's a question that came in for you, Ian. Where do you think that trust in other people finally came from? Is it just where you were in your life, or also something about their approach to you?
Where did the trust come from? I feel like I hope I answer this correctly. When I got sober, I saw all these people with such great lives and were doing such good things, and I wanted it so bad, but I didn't know how to get it. So I kind of it was part of me like just giving up, right? Um, I was like, I'm willing to do whatever it takes really for me to get what you have. You know what I mean? I feel like that's kind of where all the trust came from for me.
And I'm guessing the relatability of their stories
Hmm.
might have helped.
Yeah, I
Is
mean there's a few people's stories I've heard where I've been like, well, you actually just told my story. Um, so yeah, I mean it really like you find these people all around. It's like you barely even have to look and they understand what you're going through. Um, yeah, it's really easy to trust someone who you know has gone through the same thing as you have.
Yeah, as a parent who goes to a lot of support group meetings for the last 14 years, there's so many parallels in my recovery as somebody impacted by an addiction. I also have a dad in recovery. I mean, I've got it all over my family. To that journey of our loved one with the substance use, and for me personally, I was terrified to walk in that room. I certainly wasn't feeling trusting or open when I first walked in, but yeah, soon that's why I brought that up. Like as soon as I heard somebody express the hell I was in, I'm like, okay, you're not judging me. There's no way you're going to judge me because I just heard what you're going through, and it's exactly what I'm going through, and it just makes it so much easier to open up and talk about, the way this is affecting us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And please, folks, feel free again, chat, unmute if you want to just unmute and say, hey, I've got a question.
And while people are gathering their thoughts on questions, I did want to, because we had a question, does the school offer counseling to potentially at-risk youth? And you touched on this a little bit in your presentation, but all of our buildings have what's called SAP counselors. That's the Student Assistance Program. It is funded through Pennsylvania and locally through Montgomery County alcohol prevention organizations. And it's a really great service that we provide in our school buildings. Students can be recommended both internally from school staff and externally from parents, family members who reach out. For students who have drug or alcohol concerns, it's 6 hours of counseling services that are provided free throughout the year. The counselors are really great. They typically do it in half-hour sessions. So they're meeting with students for at least 12 times. It can be for anybody who has drug or alcohol substance abuse issues in their background. So for some of our younger students who have not used yet, it might be somebody in their family that they're impacted by. For our older students, we do offer a lot of cessation programs. They use research-based curriculum for that, but it's a free program that's available to any students. So if you're interested in that and you're on this presentation, you can always reach out to your building, your student's counselor, or you can reach out to our social workers who are on site. So those are really great resources for you to avail yourself of, and there's certainly a starting point if you feel like your child is going down that path or has family members who might abuse substances and you want them to have somebody to talk to.
Absolutely. There are some Alateen and Narateen meetings around, not nearly enough. It's a quite a heavy lift for the volunteers who support those, but They're amazing. It's a great opportunity for kids. I believe the age range is 10 to 16. That is a really, if there is an impact to that young person of substance use, it's like an Al-Anon, where this would be like where spouses and loved ones of somebody with substance use disorder gather. Alateen is for anybody. I think it's that age range of 10 to 16, I think. And again, folks, you're welcome to ask questions. I'll go ahead back to the list of advanced questions. There was this was an interesting one. How do you help children when parents are divorced and one parent does not acknowledge their addiction? That parent would be very upset if the other parent told children they had a problem with substances. So I believe the way I'm reading this is there's a parent whose former spouse, they believe, has a substance use disorder. And that person would not appreciate them telling the child this. I don't know how old the children are that are involved. This is a super tricky one. And, I think that separate from even where the child is in this, I would certainly want to consider other family members getting involved in an intervention or something like that. If you feel that you're the only person that's concerned about the ex-spouse's substance use, could it be possible that there are others who are concerned as well? And would there be an opportunity for an intervention that would not involve the child, certainly a young child, in any way? However, for the child's sake, again, not knowing their age, clinical help, it's certainly a SAP program would be great that Michelle just talked about, but also depending on their age, talking just to a therapist one-on-one, somebody who works with children. And you don't even necessarily have to identify. Again, our kids know so much more than we do. They might be aware. It could be a lot, and I'd love to hear Dr. Letz's thoughts about this, but it could be just inviting a conversation like, do you have any concerns about that other parent, mom, dad, whoever it is? Anything that you're concerned about that you want to talk to me about, that you want to talk to a trusted adult about, rather than planting that seed, because there's a good chance that child or children already know something's up and they may not have even had an opportunity to say it. It doesn't necessarily have to be the adult telling the child, there's a drinking problem here, right? It could certainly be already a concern of theirs. Dr. Letz, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we often tell parents is if you want to have an authentic conversation with your kids, the car is a great place to do it. You're not looking directly at your child, so they don't feel like they're being interrogated. There's a natural ebb and flow to the car. And so I think sometimes just kind of broaching exactly like Kim said, do you have any concerns? Like, you certainly don't want to come right out and say like, oh, have you noticed mommy or daddy, like, drinking at night? Because I think that then you're kind of putting everybody in a heightened situation. But certainly probing at that. I would also recommend, if you have any, court-ordered co-parenting sessions, opening up that line of conversation in those spaces so that you can have those conversations with the other person, hoping to come to agreement, and being able to honestly share what your child has shared with you. Is always a good starting place.
Yes, thanks. There was also a question around processed foods. Talking about kids addicted to highly processed foods, which can cause developmental delays, and healthy choices around diet, healthy social activities, exercise, as preventative alternatives. I think this all goes right back to, and by the way, I mentioned at the beginning, on February 10th with this district, we'll have that program on 21st century teens. We'll talk about different process addictions, which food addiction is a process addiction. Sugar, highly processed foods, absolutely are marketed. When we talk about when we do our cannabis program and our alcohol programs, we always talk about this 80-20 rule in marketing. That's like 80% of the product is being consumed by 20% of their customers. And this applies to processed foods as well. So those marketers are doing lots of research to see who is our most vulnerable population? Who's going to get really into these Doritos or whatever it is, So they do studies on like what hits parts of the brain when you bite into that chip and you hear the bag open. I mean, they even study the crinkle of the bag. I'm not even kidding you. I used to be a marketer. I used to read all this kind of stuff, but it is absolutely a real thing that we want to, again, really encourage those healthy choices and healthy behaviors when we're young, because, and this is all modeling too. Is that stuff in the house? If it's not in the house, they're probably not going to be having as much access to it. And, hopefully the school lunch program is based on some healthy options, and things like that. So obviously kids are going to be able to get their hands on whatever kind of food they want. When they're with friends and things like that, but we can certainly try to limit what they're exposed to when they're young at home. And again, just to really reinforce that importance of that really malleable developing brain. It is true that you can build that stuff very early on. And even, I mean, I'm guilty myself. We used to joke that when we would go traveling, that we were all of our destinations were based on where we're going to eat, and what we're going to, where's the best hamburger in this town and all that kind of stuff. And I think we gave too much importance to things like that, instead of the experience, focusing on those good experiences and less on the, what are we going to eat? Where's ice cream? Who gets dessert? We can reframe a lot of our language around food as well as substances.
Mhm. I think that segues nicely into one of the other questions that was asked, which is how are some of like these topics woven into our curriculums in school? And is there like a set curriculum? Do we just occasionally mention substances? All of these topics, from substance abuse, vaping, cannabis, alcohol use, down to highly processed foods, all of these things are mentioned in our health curriculums at varying points. Our students have really great curriculums on making healthy choices, from an age appropriate standpoint. So, when they're younger, we talk more generally about, using good foods to fuel our bodies and what does our body need in order to stay healthy. And that can be everything from, staying out of the sun and, or too much exposure to like, being in the pool for hours on ends, and what happens when our fingers get crinkly. And then it progresses from there up to, making good choices with social media, making good choices with, drug and alcohol use, and all of those topics. We have suicide prevention that occurs within our health classes. So we tackle all of those topics around the mindset of making good choices for you, and not allowing your friends or outside resources to unduly influence you.
Right. Great. I see two questions. One of them was directed just to me, but I think it's for all of us to discuss. But the question that's hidden to our panelists is, how do you encourage a parent to initiate the conversation with their child in middle or high school to see what their interest and or experience is with drugs or alcohol? So how do you encourage a parent to initiate the conversation? I would say kind of just what I was sharing at the onset of this about we want to lay the foundation for these healthy conversations. So to normalize talking about drugs and alcohol, right? So that it's not, we're only bringing it up when it's a problem, or we're only bringing it up when I suspect something. So if we can do it early on, it's so helpful. So just to encourage that parent to lay this foundation, to welcome the conversation, to normalize it, to make it easy to bring it up. And then those hints, like tips I gave about like watching a movie, let's push pause because somebody just was in a drinking contest, whatever, whatever you don't have to look hard to find, it could be a commercial. Pause on the football game. Why do you think there's so many commercials about alcohol? Why do you think that's so associated with this game, with an athletic event? What is that about? Just to have a curious conversation, again, normalizing that. And I think if you want to try to have some influence on this parent to have that conversation, to say that stat I gave at the beginning, you talk about this stuff with your kids, you're not knowledgeable about this stuff, they're much less likely to have a problem. That's the most motivating thing you can share with somebody. And here's another, and I hope I answered that question. Okay. If not, please follow up. How to answer the curiosity question is hard. What is a useful answer to why do you like wine or XYZ? So I think you're asking if the child wants to know, why does the adult like wine or XYZ? That's the question you're saying, like, well, that's a really good question. What wine does is it can relax you. It's a depressant and it can relax you. It's not something that you should do when you're younger. Adults don't have the same kind of response to alcohol that a child does. I mean, that's the truth. There's the reason that people drink is for the dopamine, unless it's an alcohol free, and then you're drinking it really for the flavor. But if it's got alcohol in it, then there's a dopamine release that happens, and that's the honest truth about it. I'll say also in line with this often is the question of what do I do when my child asks me if I ever got high, if I whatever it was when I was a kid or when I was younger. And the research tells us that we should be honest, but we do not need to get into the details. We do not need to tell any war stories. Certainly don't want to glamorize it. But we can say the truth. If the truth is that we used something when we were younger, we can say, yes, I did some experimenting. What I would do differently, because now that I understand this, I would not have done that. And here's why, so we can be honest about it, but use it as an opportunity. And if they pursue it too much, say, I don't know, it wasn't a big deal. Like, just to not get into the war stories of it, but just to acknowledge it, be honest about it, but not, but use it as an opportunity to say, like, if I knew then what I know now, I would not have used any kind of substances when I was younger. Any thoughts from either of you guys about either of those questions?
Yeah. On the second one, right? The curiosity thing, and from personal experience, right? Um, Anytime I was, ask my parents as a kid, like, what does that taste like? What does that do? It's always like, oh, it's for the grown-ups, right? Which makes a kid wonder even more. So, like, realistically, the real talk I had is like after I tried a substance, it was my parents were able to explain to me, like, hey, this is what this does to your mind and your brain, and this is why you can't do it, right? And I'm not saying it has to come to your kid, you know, using substances, because it doesn't. But I think a good way to go about it is like, cause and effect, right? What it does and why people do it. How to do it responsibly. That's always something that was brought up in conversation with my parents. I feel like that was the right way to do it for me. You know what I mean? And it could work for other people. It could not.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. I just put all the links in the chat again, and at the very end, I added the survey, which will also come up at the end of the program automatically, but I wanted to share that with you. We still have a few minutes if anyone has any other questions or comments.
Someone did ask ahead of time, methods for preventing, an extent of preventing the school takes responsibility for. I feel it's really important to point out to everybody on this presentation, any type of drugs and alcohol is expressly forbidden on school property. Students who are caught with drugs and alcohol, the district really tries to take a three-prong approach to it. There is most definitely a code of conduct disciplinary response to that. Typically includes suspension of some kind, can be anything up to and including an expulsion from school. I'd be remiss if I didn't put that out there to our audience asking that question. But we also really look at what kind of education can we provide to students to help them understand why they shouldn't do this, why it's harmful for them. And so a lot of times that ends up being, referrals to SAP services. It can be linking students with outside organizations. I know, Kim, you've been very kind and have spoken one-on-one with some of our families about resources for them out in the community that they can avail themselves of to help students who have, more serious and embedded concerns in their lives. So we always look at those two prongs. And then the third prong we really look to is what kind of restoration can we do for that student? Who do they need to apologize, make amends with? Is it friends who were mortified that, this was brought into school and they're worried about, their peer groups? Is it a close teacher that, they maybe want to talk to and better understand and explain? So we really look at it from all of those perspectives. But just being really clear, when you talk about preventing from a school standpoint, these substances aren't allowed on our school property. And so we have to take that code of conduct response, but we're always there in the background, helping the students and guiding them. We know that they're young, sometimes you make a bad decision. It shouldn't affect the overall outcome of your life. But we want to make sure that we get you the help that you
Thank you for that. And, I think the word prevention is so interesting, right? We can only do so much to prevent. We really can only do so much. Kids spend a lot of time at school, but they spend way more time at home. We have we raised our children in a very safe environment. My ex-husband is a physician. I was a work from home mom, so I was always present for them. I might be sounding a little defensive here, but the reality is that I was a hyper involved mother. There was no abuse going on. I mean, it was a beautiful, nurturing environment. And yet I have a child with a substance use disorder that I did not know about for like too many years, And so I want to share that because, I know that we parents beat ourselves up when we miss things. And we also want to maybe beat somebody else up for missing things. And that might sometimes be a school. We can't put our kids in a bubble. We can't protect them from every exposure, from every risk factor that's out there. We just can't do it. And that's not reality. That's not life, or we're all going to be faced with challenges in life and make some really horrible decisions, especially as a young person. But what we can do is be knowledgeable and informed and know about resources. And that's what you all did tonight. You all got super knowledgeable and learned about the resources in this district. If you're not from the school district of Springfield Township, there are those SAP programs in every public school. If it's a private school, they have lots of support as well. We're always here for you. Be a part of the conversation. I'm going to put my email in the chat right now, and you can always call me if I'm getting this typed right. Let's put on the readers so I make sure I have it right. There's my email address. So, there are resources to get help when we do understand that something's going on. We see any kind of red flag. There are a lot of things we can do. So also on that follow-up page that I put the link in there, the follow-up page for tonight's program is our website /K-5 parents. There's something on there called the 3 buckets. And we do this with our program, with our mock teen bedroom. The 3 buckets are like some experimentation, what to do when that happens, what to do when it kind of continues, and then finally what to do when really things have gone very badly and communication is no longer effective and it's time to get some professional help. So we have a lot of guidance for that. And anytime anybody needs some direct help, just please don't hesitate to reach out to us. That's what we're here for. So, wow, I really appreciate all of you who joined us. And Dr. Lutz, thank you again so much for having us. And Ian, amazing. Always the most important person in the room. With all due respect to everybody else, the person in recovery is always so special. And thank you for everything you shared.
Yeah, thank you, Kim, and thank you, Ian, for coming out tonight and being with us. Just a plug, next month, we're back in January. We're going to hear from an organization that's going to talk to us about LGBTQIA plus allyship, how we can help people feel supported in the LGBTQ community. And then we're back in February again with Kim and the Be Part of the Conversation crew for that 21st century teen. So I hope that you will join us. I dropped in the chat where you can register for those programs. But thank you so much.